everyone. Welcome to the Horror Ram. I'm Travis Bruce, and today I'm doing another Women of Horror Spotlight. Today I have with us, she's an author, and she has a book out right now that you can find on Amazon or wherever you get your books, and it's called Ghost Mother. I have with us Kelly Dwyer. Kelly, welcome to the Horror Ram.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to be here.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this interview. And,
Me too.
Tell us a little bit about Ghost Mother.
Sure. So Ghost Mother is a psychological ghost story. Psychological ghost stories are those where you're not really sure, is the house haunted or is the person losing touch with reality? It's about a woman named Lily Bly who moves with her husband, Jack, to a house in Wisconsin. She's suffering from infertility and bad spending habits. And she feels this is going to be the house where she's going to become a mother. So even though it's a big old wreck of a house, they go ahead and buy it. And soon she starts, first she learns that it's the murder house, that it was the site of gruesome murders and suicide in the 1950s. And after that, she begins to experience strange occurrences. And some readers feel, oh, there really are ghosts, and some readers feel it's really all in her head. And I wanted to make both of those possibilities real so that you could interpret it either way.
Now, how long did it take you from the concept of the story to actually get it on paper?
Well, this is going to make all of your viewers feel better because I had the concept about 20 years ago. So it didn't take me 20 years to write it. I didn't write it all that time, but about 20 years ago, my husband and I bought a house in Baraboo, Wisconsin, which is close to Madison. And we didn't have our own real estate agent. We used the sellers. And he kept saying, you really should look into the history of this house. So on the day of the closing, we did. And we found out that it was owned by one of the Goldmar brothers, who were first cousins to the Ringlings and who also had a circus. And we found out that one of the Goldmar's brothers had owned the house along with his wife, and his wife was murdered there, like a kind of a robbery gone wrong. It was really sad, but it happened in the 1930s. So we went ahead and bought the house. But I kept thinking about, like, what if it had been like really one of those gruesome stories you hear about? And what if the person really felt like it was haunted? We had never felt anything like that in our house. So the idea just sort of stuck with me. And then at one point I was rereading The Turn of the Screw, where you're not sure if there are ghosts or the governess is really insane. And I thought, oh, that's a really cool way into this story.
Now, and that's an amazing story. So as most of my audience knows, my day job, I'm a mortician. So, and it's kind of crazy because I always thought, sometimes, we got to pick up individuals who are at houses that suicides or murders happen. And then, I'll drive past that house a year later and there's a whole new family in the house. I'm like, I wonder if they know what happened in this house before they bought it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know that when we moved out of that house and bought our next house, the first thing we did was say, who has owned this house before? And sort of looked at the list of owners. We didn't want any surprises at that point, but that is interesting. Yeah.
Now, so you came up with the concept of this 20 years ago, mm-hmm. and over time you've been molding the story. How much has this story changed over the 20 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would get excited about it, and then I sort of went off on some wrong tracks early on, so I would put it away and pick it up again. A couple major differences. So in real life, Mrs. Goldmar had died in the 1930s, and when I did research on her life and her murder, one thing that really struck me was that you could see the rumblings of World War II happening in real time, but it was very subtle, like page 6, Italian Jews forced to give up passports, that sort of thing. So at first I thought, oh, I'm going to work on this theme. And that turned out to be just a dead end. It just wasn't really going anywhere. So that became completely different. I used a backstory that was a circus backstory with 3 characters that I made up, a trapeze artist, a young trapeze artist, her husband, and their daughter. And that was really fun to write. You know, I did do some research on circus history, but basically I made up the story. So that was different. And then I think Lily, the main character, developed over time, and the ending, you know, was completely different. Right away, I had the idea for the climax of the backstory, but I really didn't know what was going to happen in the present. So I would say a lot changed. I'm trying to think of what was the same, and I think it was just that original idea of like, are there ghosts or is this person losing touch with reality?
Because I mean, I can imagine as a writer, you know, over 20 years, you change as a person, but not only that, you change as a writer. Your writing style changes. You start maturing as a writer. So it's probably, I'm not surprised that it's not a completely different story.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting because, like the main character, I struggled with infertility. I do have a daughter. But when I first started thinking about this story, that was something I was experiencing. And by the time I was finished, it was almost like I had to do research, like I had forgotten so much about the process. So I was able to draw on my own experiences, but I also had to try and remember what that was like because it had happened, you know, a while ago.
Now, as a indie horror writer, right now, it's a great time to be an indie horror writer because you can get stuff published. Now, but do you feel like that's a good thing, or do you feel like that's a bad thing? Because anybody now, I mean, the market when it comes to indie horror writing novels, stories, is kind of getting flooded.
I love it. I am traditionally published. The book is out with Union Square and Company, which is a New York publisher. They used to be called Sterling. They're an affiliate of Barnes and Noble. But I feel like the self-publishing opportunities are fantastic. And I think that there used to be a stigma a long time ago against self-publishing, but I don't feel that any at all. And I don't feel that there is that stigma anymore. I just think that there's a lot of great writing being published, both self-publishing and traditional publishing. There is a lot of competition, but I find that it's inspiring. You know, I love to see all the new horror books coming out and check them out and read them. And so often I just feel, you know, just completely inspired, as I'm sure your viewers do, by all the great horror stories out. I also, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I also feel that the community is very supportive.
100%, 100%. And as a horror fan and a horror reader, I am so glad because, you know, there was a time that, you know, there was you would see maybe 5 horror books on Amazon or in a store. Yeah. And now there's so many to choose from. And like, that's one thing I did the show because there's so many great books out right now, so many great authors, and it's hard for them to get their name out or get their project out. Yeah, that's true. 2 points come to mind. One is I used to go to Barnes and Noble and look at the horror section, and I would just feel like I've read all of these books now. You know, when is a new one going to come out? Now you go there and there's so many that I haven't read, you know, so I do think that's positive. In terms of getting the word out, I have found that because of people like you and others who are just really interested in sharing women horror writers or just horror writers in general, it is easier to get the word out now than it probably was even 10 years ago. You know, there's such a supportive horror community on Instagram and on other social media sites. So it's difficult, but I find that if you reach out to people or you embrace those opportunities, it does help. I agree. I agree. And like, I mean, there's even with horror conventions and horror book conventions, there's so many out now, and like, it's definitely a great way to market yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I have a question. Have you always been a horror fan?
No. Um,
Really?
yes, no, I came to it sort of late. So I guess I was always a horror film fan. Like,
Mhm.
I loved the old classics like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby. But I feel like I'm not really slasher for its own sake. I know that some people get into that. You know how many subgenres there are, and we all have our
Tons.
favorites and everything. So I always liked religious horror, which Ghost Mother is not, or then elevated horror like Jordan Peele, Get Out. And so I was always a film fan, but I really didn't start reading horror until fairly recently. I think because as I was growing up, there was really only Stephen King, and then once you had read his books, what was next? And then it seemed like more and more horror writers started to get more popular, started to write better stories too, which I really enjoyed. So, what about you, Travis? Have you always been a horror fan?
Ever since I was 3 or 4 years old. So my mother was a huge horror fan. And this is back in I'm showing my age. I'm 41. So this is back in the VHS days.
Yeah.
Like when we went to the video store every Saturday, we would always get one horror film and one action film. So that's why I'm a huge horror fan and I'm a huge John Claude Van Damme fan because that's what we were probably watching on a Saturday movie night.
Yeah,
But
that's great. That's so cool of your mom too to expose you that at a
yeah,
young age. Yeah.
and when it comes to horror books, I like a lot of people my age or even younger. R.L. Stein Goosebumps
Sure.
really got me into horror writing. I mean, that was the first, horror book that I grabbed. I fell in love to, and then from there I started elevating to Dean Koontz and Stephen
Yeah.
King.
Yeah.
But like R.L. Stein Goosebumps, I fell in love with horror writing at a young age.
That's awesome.
And like I don't. I mean, I'm shocked that R.L. Stein has so many indie horror authors or authors in general, I've asked, what do you guys do in horror writing? And some say Stephen King, but a lot, depending on the age range, they say R.L. Stein. I mean, R.L. Stein, I don't feel like he gets his praise in the writing community.
That's so true. I feel like people think of that as kids writing, and yet what inspires you except for kids writing? That's when you become a reader and become a writer and
Mhm.
become a viewer. So he really has had a formative impact on so many people.
Yes, and I mean, I feel like he should be right up there with the writer of Harry Potter. I can't think of her name now. Token.
J.K. Rowling, yeah,
J.K. Rowling, yeah,
yeah.
and even R.K. Token, R.L.'s Token. Oh, what's the guy? Lord of the Rings.
Is it J.R. Tolkien?
J.R. Token, yes,
We'll just
and
call him Tolkien. I don't.
Lizzie Token to the Token, yes. But
We
like,
know we've got that right.
exactly, like he should be put up there with like iconic youth writers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think the first, and I don't even know if this is really considered horror, but I think the first horror books that I loved were more like in college or a little later, like The Shining. And then I know that's considered horror, but I was thinking of like We've Always Lived in the Castle. I don't know if Shirley Jackson, I think she's sort of, I guess it's like literary horror, which I'm really attracted to. So I think those were two early inspirations for me.
And you pointed us to something about horror has so many subgenres
Yeah.
because it confuses me when I hear someone say I do not like horror.
Yeah.
Like it's a blanket thing, but
Yeah.
well, like, I always say, well, maybe you haven't found your subgenre of horror because I mean, there's found
Exactly.
footage, there's romantic horror, there's vampires, you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
slashers, and I think horror gets tossed into the category of slashers so much,
Yes.
and there's so many other subgenres.
And even within that, like I'm thinking of something like The Deep by Nick Cutter, which
Hmm.
I'm reading now. I haven't finished it yet. But it seems like even that is like a kind of gore horror or body horror that I think is really interesting. So even within the genre body horror, there are all of these different levels that I think some people will be attracted to, and others are like, that's not for me. But I agree with you, Travis. When I tell people, like, this is a gothic horror story or a psychological ghost story, so many say, I don't like horror.
Hmm.
Well, do you like this? Do you like that? Oh, yeah, I like those. Well, then you like horror, you like some
Yeah.
subgenre of it. And I'm sure I don't even know all of the subgenres. People have called this gothic horror, grief horror, mother horror, um, Midwestern horror, all kinds of,
Hmm.
subgenres that I find really interesting.
So I mean, because I had K.A. Schultz. She's an author, and we actually did a live show, and we were comparing the talented Mr. Ripley and the new movie Saltburn. And so many people was like, well, those movies are not horror movies. Those movies are not horror movies. It was like horror authors were saying that, and I'm like, they are okay. Listen, yes, they don't have blood and guts, but they're terrifying. You know what I mean? They're terrifying. They're disturbing. It falls into the horror realm.
That's a really good point. I think people have a preconception like it has to be either gory or supernatural,
Hmm.
but those are both great examples of films and books that are just terrifying.
Yeah, and I
When
think
I
that's
think
what.
of horror, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm about to say I think a horror is something that disturbs you or makes you feel
Yes,
uneasy.
I was just going to say that. When I think of horror, I think of the word dread.
Yes,
That feeling like, oh, I'm dreading what's going to happen, but I can't look away.
you should never walk away from a horror movie feeling great. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow, that was fun. No, you should feel like, oh wow, that was messed up, or oh wow, I wish I wasn't in that situation. I'm glad I wasn't in a situation like that.
Yes, I really like that. Yes, you shouldn't walk away from a horror movie feeling good.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because sometimes I feel like horror movies or horror books get maybe lower ratings than I think they warrant because people have that feeling like, oh, I was terrified throughout, I was riveted throughout, but the ending was super dark. So 2 stars, you know? Well,
Yeah,
you know what you're getting into, right?
exactly. Yeah, I mean, anybody. I mean, even when I go to theaters a lot, and I see a horror movie. I like walking out and being like, "Wow, that was messed up," or
Yeah.
"Wow, that was crazy." If I walk out of a horror movie, I'm like, huh, "Oh well, what's for dinner?" You know, it didn't do its job.
No, I agree. What are some of your favorite endings?
Oh, some of my favorite endings.
While you're
Trying to think.
thinking, I'll just
Okay, I'm gonna think.
mention that in Ghost Mother, a few people have talked about how, well, they've said that they didn't see the climax coming. And I love that because I feel like, wow, you can't really trick horror readers very often. So I took that as a compliment. And also that the ending felt ambiguous to them. Like if you believe there are ghosts, then you feel the ending is one thing. And if you believe it's all in Lily's head, then you believe the ending is another. So I really tried to make a powerful ending. But yeah, there are just so many movies and books with great endings. So I was just curious about maybe one favorite you had.
All right, so I got three on top of my head. I just brought up one, Saltburn. I know a lot of people said that they saw that ending coming. I really didn't. I didn't start seeing it coming until like right towards the end. I was like, oh, something's going on.
Yeah.
So that's one. This is older one. Sixth Sense. I did not. I saw it before the buzz was out, and everybody was saying, "Oh well, Bruce Willis was a ghost." By the way, spoiler alert: if you haven't seen Sixth Sense in 2024, but I, I didn't see that coming and I remember watching that movie over and over and over again, even over the years, to see it if I could see it. And you just don't, you see it, but you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was such a great ending. And the final one, this is an old one, and it's Sleepaway Camp.
I need to see that.
All right, yeah, but Sleepaway Camp. I mean, it had an ending that was so shocking, and it was like, whoa! And that final freeze, it's definitely probably an ending. People ask me all the time, what movie would I like to? If I was going to make a movie right now, if I was going to do a reboot or a remake movie, I would say Sleepaway Camp. But I don't know how you can do that in the year 2024, because that movie was so offensive in so many ways, and just so, I'm gonna say, even groundbreaking. And I think you can't do that right now. I think the climate of the culture right now, for the good, it's one of those endings that would be inappropriate in the year 2024.
Well, now you've got me really curious.
Yes. I'm telling you, you're not going to see that ending coming at all. You're like, I did not see that at all.
Great.
All
Yeah,
right, so,
I really agree with you about Saltburn and The Sixth Sense. I did not see The Sixth Sense coming, and I love the ending of Saltburn. It was just, that movie was a slow burn, and to get to that ending was so satisfying.
it really was. I mean, Saltburn, such a good movie. I mean, such a good movie. And by the way, Katie Schultz, thanks for telling me to watch that, because I saw people make posts about it, and it was sitting on Amazon for months, and I was like, what is this? And I was like, I don't think this is something I'll be into. And I'm so glad I watched it. It was
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
So good.
As soon as people started posting, don't see this movie, it's disgusting, I was like, okay, I will see it right now.
See, I thought, don't watch this movie, it's disgusting, but it's not a horror movie. I kept seeing that because, I follow a lot of indie horror people, and say, oh, this movie is not all that. It's not a horror movie. Guys, stop calling this horror movie. It's not a horror movie. And then like, nah, guys, it is horror movie. Saltburn is 100% a horror movie.
Yeah.
It's 100% horror movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. So where can everyone find you and your work?
Okay. So my website is kellydwyerauthor.com. You can email me there. You can follow me on Instagram there, Facebook. I'm not on X very much, but I don't know if anyone is right now. And yeah, feel free to get in touch. kellydwyerauthor.com.
Kelly, this was such a fun interview and a fun conversation.
It was such a pleasure, Travis. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes. And I want to invite you too. In a couple months, I'm going to be doing a live roundtable with indie women authors. And
Yay.
I would love to have you on that roundtable.
I would love that. Please.
Okay. I'm going to add you to the list. Listen,
Yay.
everybody, please grab your copy of Ghost Mother. Find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get your books. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and that's Kelly Dwyer. We'll see you next time. Take care.